I watched my son humiliate me in front of everyone because of my old car. But what he didn't know is that the car held a secret so big it made my pain disappear. I was there, and I discovered something no one tells you. The pain of a betrayal can actually be the first step towards the biggest revelation of your life. Imagine waking up on a normal day and in the blink of an eye, having your life's work reduced to a joke in front of your own son's friends. The pain I felt wasn't from the humiliation, but from seeing the distance between us become an abyss. Today, I'm going to show you how a simple secret hidden inside that old car can bring hope back. Every second counts. If you let this lesson pass you by, you run the risk of never understanding what it truly means to be proud of a son. Stay with me until the end and discover the one gesture that saved me when all seemed lost and what I decided to do with the truth. You won't believe what the mechanic revealed to me. I'm Don Manuel Aguilar. I'm 82 years old, and I live in the same town where I was born, a quiet little place tucked between dusty hills and sugarcane fields in central Mexico. I'm a retired carpenter, though I still tinker in my workshop most mornings. I build birdhouses, fix broken chairs, sharpen old tools, things that don't bring money anymore, but bring me peace. Since my wife passed 5 years ago, the silence of the house has grown, but I fill it with the rhythm of hands working wood and the hum of my old Ford F-100. That truck has been with me for decades. I always thought it was mine. Back in the 1970s, when life was tougher and pesos were harder to come by, that truck was my savior. I'd drive it to nearby towns with crates of furniture strapped in the back or rolls of pine for cabinets. It rattled over potholes, stalled sometimes on cold mornings, but it never left me stranded. Over time, it became more than a vehicle. It became my companion. People in town recognize it, like they recognize me, the old man with the old truck. We're a pair. My son Daniel doesn't see it that way. He's an architect now, lives in Guadalajara, dresses in clothes I can't pronounce, drives cars with screens that talk to you. He visits once or twice a year. When he does, it's like the pace of my world clashes with his. He brings his noise, his gadgets, his impatience. I love him, Dios sabe que sí, but sometimes I think he sees me as a relic, something to be pitied or worse, upgraded. Last Sunday, he arrived with his friends, a group of shiny boys with sunglasses too big for their faces and laughter that never reaches their eyes. They were in town for some festival, wine, art, something too fancy for someone like me. Daniel had parked his new car outside, a silver machine that looked more like a spaceship than a car. "Come see this, Papa," he said, walking me over. "Real engineering." I smiled, nodded, and admired it politely. Then he gestured toward my truck. "And this," he added with a chuckle, "this is what happens when you live in the past." His friends laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. One of them said something about the truck belonging in a museum. Daniel smirked, looked me up and down, and said, "Sometimes I wonder how you can still drive that piece of junk. You don't need to cling to it, Papa. It's embarrassing." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat closed up like a door slammed in the wind. I just touched the side of the truck. The same. A way a man touches an old dog, loyal and bruised, who doesn't understand why he's no longer wanted. That truck carried my life, my marriage, my work, and now my own son was ashamed of it, of me. The rest of the afternoon passed in slow motion. I pretended to have errands, stayed in the shed longer than usual. When Daniel left the next day, he barely looked at me. "Take care, old man," he said, as if we were strangers passing on a street. The next morning, I climbed into the truck to make my usual drive to the plaza, but the engine sputtered, coughed, and gave up. After a few tries, I gave in. Maybe it was finally her time. So I called Emilio, my old friend and the town's mechanic. He's been fixing my truck since the beginning. His shop smells like oil, dust, and coffee, same as always. When I drove the truck there on a tow, I felt like I was leading a horse to pasture one last time. Emilio smiled when he saw us. "Still kicking, huh?" he said, patting the hood like greeting an old friend. Let's see what's going on under the skin. I sat nearby, sipping from a bottle of warm soda, watching him lean into the engine like a surgeon. Emilio wiped his hands on a rag as he leaned back and studied the engine. Funny thing, he muttered, squinting at a bolt near the carburetor. I remember this part. I welded that bracket myself back in the day. Had to modify it for someone, but not for you. His voice trailed off as he stared deeper, as if memory itself was buried in the rust. I looked up, confused. What do you mean, not for me? I bought this truck new, brand new. He turned slowly to face me, his eyes tightening in a way I hadn't seen before. Don Manuel, this truck wasn't new when you got it. I remember now. That bracket? I made it for a kid. Skinny guy, maybe 16 or 17, quiet but determined. He worked here for a while doing cleanups. Saved every peso to buy this truck from your brother-in-law. You remember Esteban, right? My mouth dried. I nodded slowly. Esteban sold this truck? Emilio nodded. Yes, to that kid. I helped fix it up for him, made some changes so it'd run better in the hills. Then one day it was gone. Next thing I know, it's in your hands, and I figured, well, maybe your brother-in-law just passed it on to you. But that bracket, he pointed with his wrench, that was for the kid. I never forget my work. My heart started thudding in my chest, like something heavy had been dropped inside it. What kid, Emilio? What was his name? Emilio stepped back, leaned on the workbench. His face had softened, like he was searching for the right words. Your son, Don Manuel. Daniel, he bought this truck for you. He asked Esteban to keep it quiet. He said he didn't want you to know, just wanted you to have something reliable for your work. My breath left me all at once. I felt the weight of years settle on my shoulders in a way I had never experienced before. All this time, I thought the truck was a symbol of my struggle, my pride, my independence. But it had been a gift, a sacrifice, a secret act of love from a boy who once admired me so deeply he gave me his everything and never asked for credit. I sat down on an overturned bucket, staring at the floor. Images swirled in my mind. Daniel as a boy, handing me a cold drink after a long day, asking if I liked the truck, smiling every time I complimented it. He was always so quiet about it, never proud in the way young men can be. I thought it was because he didn't care, but now I understood he cared too much. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Emilio placed a hand on my shoulder. Maybe he thought you'd be too proud to accept it, or maybe he just wanted to see you happy without feeling like you owed him anything. The irony stung. That same boy, now a grown man, had mocked the very gift he once worked so hard to give. He had humiliated me for owning a symbol of his own silent love. The confusion inside me was heavy, twisted. I didn't know if I should cry. From shame or gratitude, my hands, these same old hands that had built cabinets, tables, doors, they had gripped a steering wheel for decades, thinking it was mine by effort. But no, it was Daniel's effort, and he had forgotten. I walked home instead of taking a ride from Emilio. I needed the time. Each step on that familiar dirt road felt heavier than usual, like the weight of the truth had settled into my bones. I replayed Daniel's words in my head, not the ones from Emilio, but the ones he said just days ago when he called the truck a disgrace. My throat tightened. How could he forget what it meant? How could he forget what he did? Back at the house, I sat on the porch for a long time, staring at the empty space where the truck usually rested. The sunlight moved slowly over the cobblestones, shadows shifting across the walls like memories I hadn't looked at in years. I thought about calling him, just dialing his number and telling him everything Emilio told me. But I didn't. I wasn't ready. I didn't even know how to feel. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed with my hands folded over my chest, like I was waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. I thought about my wife, how proud she was of Daniel, how we used to watch him sleep as a boy, whispering prayers for his future. I wondered if she knew. I wondered if she had been part of the secret, and if she was, why hadn't she told me? By morning, I had made a decision. I would wait until the truck was ready, drive it one last time through town, and then go see him. Not to scold him, not even to confront him. I just wanted to understand. I wanted to look my son in the eyes and ask him honestly, why? 3 days later, Emilio called. "She's good as new," he said. "Stronger than I expected." I chuckled, but the sound didn't reach my chest. I walked to the shop in silence. When I saw her, the truck, cleaned up and humming like she'd been waiting for me, something swelled in my chest. Gratitude, grief, pride, all of it. I ran my hand along the hood, almost like an apology. Driving it again was like shaking hands with my past. The town looked the same, but I didn't, not inside. I drove slowly past the plaza, past the school, past the church where Daniel was baptized. Everyone waved, I waved back, but my mind was already on the road to Guadalajara. I had called Daniel the night before, told him I wanted to visit. He sounded distracted, but he agreed. I arrived outside his building, a tall, polished tower with glass windows and cold marble floors. Nothing like home. When I rang his number, a buzzer opened the gate. No hug, no welcome, just a nod and a, "You drove all the way in that thing?" I smiled gently. "Yeah," I said. "She still runs." We sat in his living room, him on his sleek leather sofa, me perched on the edge like a stranger. I looked at him for a long time before speaking. His eyes were tired, his jaw tense. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you remember where I got the truck?" He frowned. "You always said you bought it. Why?" I watched him, searching for the boy he used to be. "Because Emilio told me otherwise." Daniel's eyes flickered. A muscle in his cheek twitched. "Emilio," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "What does he have to do with it?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle between us like dust in a forgotten room. He told me about the bracket, the modification he made. Not for me, for a kid who bought the truck before I ever laid hands on it. He looked away toward the window. His hands tightened into fists on his lap. "It was a long time ago," he muttered. "You needed it. I was trying to help." His voice cracked just slightly on the word help. I could feel his shame in the air, thick and quiet like fog. "You never told me," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even sad. It was soft, honest. "I spent my whole life thinking I earned that truck, thinking it was mine, but it was yours. You gave it to me when you had nothing." Daniel didn't speak. He just stared at the floor. I watched the man in front of me, the man with fine suits and a city apartment, shrink into the boy I used to carry on my shoulders. "Why did you keep it a secret?" I asked. "Why hide something so good?" His voice, when it came, was quiet. "Because I wanted you to feel proud. You were always so proud of that truck, of what you built. I didn't want to take that away from you." His eyes finally met mine. And then I forgot. Or maybe I just stopped seeing what it meant. I saw you with that old thing and I got embarrassed. I nodded. Not in approval, not in disappointment, just in recognition. That kind of truth doesn't need a verdict. It just needs space to breathe. I stood up, walked to the window and looked out at the city, the taxis, the honking, the people rushing nowhere. "You once gave me something I never asked for, something I didn't know I needed, and I've held on to it my entire life." He stayed seated, staring at his shoes. "I'm sorry, Papa," he whispered. "I forgot who I was, who you are." The apology wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was real, from a part of him he'd buried under years of distance and ambition. I turned back to him. "The truck doesn't matter," I said, "but the boy who bought it, I miss him. I miss that version of you. He was kind, brave. I hope he's still in there." I saw his eyes fill, but he blinked it away quickly. That was enough for me. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't much left to say that hadn't already been spoken in silence. I stayed the night in a small guest room that Daniel barely used. It smelled like air conditioning and furniture polish. Nothing like home, where everything carries the scent of time and memory. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to hold on to the peace I felt in the mechanic's shop before everything turned itself inside out. In the morning, he offered to make coffee. It was awkward, watching him fumble with a fancy machine that hissed and gurgled like it belonged on a spaceship. I sipped it slowly, not because it tasted good, but because the act felt like a bridge. Two men trying to meet halfway across years of misunderstanding. When it was time to go, we stood by the building entrance. The truck waited on the curb like an old friend, patient and proud. Daniel looked at it for a long time, then ran his hand across the driver's side door. "She still looks strong," he said. I smiled. "Stronger than you'd think." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small envelope, and handed it to me. I kept this. It's the receipt from Esteban. I don't know why I held on to it all these years. I took it without opening it, just nodded. That was enough. Proof wasn't necessary. Not anymore. As I climbed into the truck, he stood beside the open door. "You ever think about selling her?" he asked. I chuckled. "Not in this lifetime." He laughed too. The first real laugh between us. "In years." I started the engine. She turned over on the first try, like she knew we had more miles left in us. "Come visit more often," he said. "I mean it." I nodded, eyes on the road. "You come home sometimes too. The Domino's table still misses you." That made him smile. For a moment he looked like the boy who used to hand me nails on the porch, eager to help. That boy was still there, just buried under suits and deadlines. I pulled away slowly, merging into traffic, and didn't look back. Until I hit the main highway. The city faded behind me like a dream you can't quite explain. The road home stretched out in front of me, wide and warm under the sun. And beside me, on the seat, the envelope rested like a whisper from the past, a quiet reminder of all the things we do out of love, even when we forget why. The road between Guadalajara and my town winds like an old scar through the hills. I've driven it hundreds of times, but that morning felt different. Every curve reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. Daniel in the passenger seat when he was 10, eating tamales out of foil as we bounced down the dirt roads. My wife humming softly beside me during those long drives to visit her sister. Now it was just me and the wind, and a story too heavy to keep but too sacred to share carelessly. I stopped halfway at a little roadside cafe I used to visit with Rosa. The woman who owns it, Doña Clara, recognized me right away. "Still driving that beast?" she joked, pointing at the truck. I smiled, but it was tight. "She's still got more heart than most machines I've seen," I said. I ordered a café de olla and sat outside, watching the clouds shift above the hills. My mind kept circling the same thought. How easily we forget the origin of the things we cherish most. By the time I got home, the sun had started its descent. The shadows stretched long over the plaza, and a few kids were kicking a ball near the fountain. As I pulled into the driveway, my neighbor Tomas waved from his porch. "Thought you were gone for good," he shouted. I waved back and laughed. "Not yet. Still got some stories left in me." Inside, the house smelled like old pine wood and cinnamon. I hadn't lit the stove in days, but the air still carried Rosa's essence somehow, as if she lived in the walls, quietly watching over everything. That night, I opened the envelope. The receipt was yellowed, the ink a little faded, but clear enough. Esteban's signature, the model of the truck, and Daniel's name. There it was, a boy's sacrifice in handwriting. I traced it with my finger like it was scripture. I felt a sting behind my eyes, the kind that comes from both gratitude and guilt. How had I never questioned the story I'd told myself about that truck? I placed the paper inside an old photo album between a picture of Rosa and me at the beach and one of Daniel as a teenager holding a hammer too big for his hands. That seemed fitting, a memory of something he built, not with tools, but with love. I sat there for a while, turning pages, letting time wash over me like a slow tide. The next morning, I drove to the plaza like I always did. The boys were already setting up the dominoes. "Manuel!" one of them called out. "We thought you ditched us for the city life." I laughed more freely this time. "City life doesn't smell like wet earth and tortillas, my friends." They made space for me, and I eased into my usual seat, the one with the leg that always wobbled. Just a bit. While we played, I noticed a small boy watching the truck from a distance, his hands tucked behind his back like he was afraid to touch something holy. I called him over. "You like old things?" I asked. He nodded shyly. "My grandpa had a truck like that. It made a sound like a horse sneezing." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. "Well, she still sneezes sometimes, but she gets me where I need to go." After the game, I sat on the truck's tailgate and looked at the sky, turning gold. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel forgotten. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt rooted. In memories, in love, in everything unspoken that still held weight. The kind of things men don't say, but feel with every breath. And I knew then, that truck was more than mine or Daniel's. It was a bridge between who we were and who we forgot we could still be. Later that week, I decided to give the truck a deep cleaning, not just the usual dust-off and hose spray. I pulled it into the shade by the workshop, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work with a bucket of soapy water, a sponge, and an old toothbrush for the corners. As I scrubbed the dashboard, I discovered a faint scratch near the glove box, almost invisible. It read, barely legible, "Para mi papá con todo." My breath caught. I ran my fingers over the words as if they'd been written yesterday. I don't know how I missed it all those years. Or maybe I saw it once and forgot. Maybe life distracted me. Work, grief, the rhythms of routine. But there it was, carved softly into plastic, like a whisper from a boy trying to leave a mark without drawing too much attention. I sat back in the seat and just stared at it. A son's quiet gift. Not a declaration, not a performance, just love, etched into the silence. That small inscription changed something in me. It made me want to remember things more clearly, not just events, but feelings. The sound of Daniel's laugh when he was 8, the way he'd lean against the truck door and kick pebbles while waiting for me to finish a job, the smell of sawdust on his clothes after helping me in the shop. These weren't memories I'd lost. They were ones I'd stopped visiting. I started writing again in an old spiral notebook I'd abandoned years ago. Nothing fancy, just bits and pieces. A sentence about the weather, a thought about Rosa, a list of birds I saw near the mango trees. And then, one afternoon, I wrote a letter to Daniel. Not to send, just to say what I needed to say without interruption. I told him I forgave him. I told him I was proud. I told him the boy who bought that truck had never left. He'd only gone quiet for a while. Days passed. I kept driving the truck like always, but now with a new awareness, not just of the road, but of what it meant to be carried. I began to notice how many people in town treated me with a quiet reverence, like the truck wasn't just a vehicle, but a relic of something deeper. They didn't know the full story, of course, but they sensed it. Sometimes truth doesn't need to be shouted, it just needs to be lived. One evening, after helping a neighbor fix a sagging fence, I parked the truck under a jacaranda tree and just sat there, listening to the wind rustling the purple blossoms. I thought about how Daniel's hands must have shaken when he signed that receipt. How hard it must have been to give away the only thing he'd ever owned just to make my life easier. That kind of love. It doesn't vanish, it gets buried, but it doesn't die. That night Daniel called, not for anything in particular, just to talk. He asked about the birds, about Emilio, about whether the domino crew still cheated on Fridays. I laughed and told him, only when it counts. He chuckled too. There was something lighter in his voice, less urgency, more presence. Maybe he was remembering too. Before hanging up, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about coming back for a weekend, just to breathe." I told him he'd always have a place here, not just in the house. in the stories, in the memories, in the silence under the jacaranda where men sit and think about the lives they've lived and the things they almost forgot to say. The next Sunday, I woke up early, long before the church bells rang. There was something in the air, a calm stillness, like the town was holding its breath. I made my coffee, folded a clean shirt over the back of the chair, and stepped outside. The truck sat in the morning light, its paint catching the sun in quiet reflections. I placed my hand on the hood and whispered, "Let's take a different route today." I didn't know why. I just felt like she needed to be seen, not just used. I drove toward the edge of town, past the abandoned mill and the river trail where Daniel used to skip stones. It had rained the night before, and the scent of wet earth rose up like perfume from the fields. I stopped on the bridge overlooking the canyon, the same bridge where Daniel had once leaned over the rail and asked me if I thought he could ever be as useful as this truck. At the time, I'd laughed, but now that question echoed with a tenderness I'd overlooked. Back at the plaza, the boys were already playing. I joined them, but I couldn't focus. My mind was somewhere else, somewhere between the past and what was still possible. As the afternoon sun softened, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there he was, Daniel, standing there with a travel bag slung over his shoulder and a sheepish grin. "You said the dominoes table missed me," he said. The others cheered, clapped him on the back, pulled over a chair. But I just stared, my heart swelling in my chest like bread rising in an oven. He looked different, not in his clothes or hair, but in his eyes. There was warmth again, that silent current that flows between men who've lost and rediscovered something precious. We didn't hug, we didn't need to. We just sat, played, let time do the talking. That evening he asked to ride in the truck. "Now I want to hear her sneeze," he joked. I handed him the keys without hesitation. He climbed in like he belonged there, and he did. I sat on the passenger side for the first time in decades. The seat felt foreign but good, like watching your child drive you somewhere you once carried him. Full circle. We drove in silence for a while, past the school, the cemetery, the hillside where wild goats used to climb. Then he asked, "Papa, do you think it's too late for me to build something here?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "You already did. You just forgot the foundation you laid." He nodded, eyes on the road, like he understood more than he could say. Back home, I pulled out the notebook, the one I'd been writing in. I handed it to him. "It's not poetry," I warned, "mostly ramblings, but it's all true." He flipped through a few pages, stopped at the letter I'd written him. His jaw tightened, and he placed the book gently on his lap. "Thanks," he whispered, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the notebook. That night we ate together, tortillas, beans, and cheese. Nothing fancy, just home. He cleaned the dishes while I watched from the doorway. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man holding on to the past. I felt like a father, and more importantly, like a man who'd finally been seen, not just for what he'd built, but for what he'd loved. In the days that followed, Daniel stayed, longer than I expected. He didn't have meetings to rush back to or deadlines pulling him away. Instead, he spent mornings in the workshop with me, sanding down old stools, fixing drawer handles, oiling rusted hinges. His hands, once soft from city life, began to stiffen with calluses again. I watched him rediscover the rhythm of manual work, not just as labor, but as something meditative. "I forgot how wood smells when it's alive," he said one morning, brushing sawdust from his palms. We talked more, but never about the truck again. It was as if the story had already been told, and now it lived silently between us, respected. Instead, we talked about Rosa, about his childhood, about things we had skipped over for years because life had gotten too noisy. He asked questions I never thought he'd care about. "Did you ever think of leaving here? What scared you the most when you became a father?" I answered as best I could, sometimes with words, sometimes with pauses. 1. Afternoon, he helped Doña Elvira carry groceries from the market. She whispered to me later, "Your boy's changed. He looks you in the eyes now." I nodded, heart full. Change doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in the way someone carries a watermelon for an old lady, or how he lingers longer at the dinner table after the last tortilla's gone. One evening, I found Daniel sitting alone on the tailgate of the truck, looking up at the stars. I joined him. No words needed. After a while, he asked, "Papa, what should I do with my life now?" I let the question hang in the air. "Start by not forgetting who you are," I said, "and don't rush to find answers. Sometimes they come slow, like trees growing in dry soil, but when they do, they hold strong." The next morning, I handed him a set of old keys, not to the truck, but to the workshop. "If you ever want to come back and make things again, it's yours too." He took them gently, turning the metal in his fingers like it was something sacred. "Gracias," he said. And it wasn't just for the keys. It was for the space, the trust, the home. That day, he helped me fix the roof tiles. It was the hottest afternoon of the week and we sweated like mules, but we laughed more than we complained. I couldn't remember the last time we'd worked side by side without the weight of silence between us. It felt like we were stitching something back together, not just tiles, but time itself. That night, before bed, I left the truck, keys on the table. He saw them, glanced at me and asked, "For me?" I shrugged. "If you want to take her out tomorrow, just don't drive her like those city taxis." He laughed. "I'll treat her better than that." And I believed him, because he finally remembered what she meant, and more importantly, what she carried. As I lay in bed, the night breeze drifting through the window, I thought about legacies. Not the kind written in wills or carved in plaques, but the quiet kind, passed down through shared work, familiar roads, worn-out tools and old trucks. The kind you don't always recognize until years later when something breaks and then is rebuilt, stronger. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the truck engine humming outside. It was Daniel, sitting in the driver's seat, waiting like a boy ready for school again. I smiled, grabbed my hat, and walked out. "Where are we going?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "I want to see the road you always talked about, the one that runs along the orange groves." That stretch was a favorite of mine, mostly because Rosa loved watching the trees blur into green waves. We drove slowly, windows down, letting the wind carry the scent of citrus and dust. He asked about every bend, every broken fence, every worn signpost. I told him about the man who once raised goats on the hill, about the couple who got married under the old mesquite tree. He listened with real interest, like he was collecting pieces of a puzzle he'd never known. Was missing. We stopped under that mesquite. I showed him the initials Rosa and I had carved into the trunk decades ago. They were faint now, softened by time and bark, but still there. "You were just a baby when we did this," I said. Daniel ran his fingers over the letters. "I don't remember this tree, but it feels like home anyway." That moment, him standing there quietly honoring what came before, meant more than any apology ever could. Later that day, back in town, he suggested we stop by Emilio's shop. "I owe him a thank you," he said. I nodded. When we walked in, Emilio was hunched over an engine, same as always. He looked up, surprised, and grinned. "Well, well, the city boy returns." Daniel laughed and offered his hand. "Thanks for keeping the truth safe," he said. Emilio didn't say much, just nodded and slapped his shoulder like a proud uncle. That evening, we pulled out old photo albums. Daniel sat on the floor, flipping through them slowly, asking questions about people he barely remembered. Uncles, cousins, neighbors who had long since moved or passed. Each page was a thread to the life we used to share, a life that hadn't disappeared, just faded in his memory. "You were always there," he said. "I just stopped looking back." The power went out around dinner time, a common thing in town. I lit the candles without thinking, and Daniel helped set the table. We ate beans and rice by candlelight like in the old days. No music, no TV, just forks clinking, the occasional chuckle, and stories that didn't need background noise. When the lights came back, neither of us moved to switch them on. That night, he stayed up writing in the same notebook I'd given him. I didn't ask what. It wasn't my place. Some things a man needs to write for himself. But I saw the way his brow furrowed, the way his hand moved slowly, deliberately, like someone building something solid again after too many quick constructions that never lasted. In the morning, he told me he'd be heading back to Guadalajara the next day. Not for long, he added. I just need to tie some things up. I didn't ask what, but I knew. The way he said it, the way he looked at the truck and then at the workshop. Something had shifted, and it wasn't temporary. He wasn't just visiting anymore. He was finding his way back. That last day before Daniel left, we rose early. I made breakfast, eggs with chorizo, tortillas fresh off the comal, and coffee strong enough to wake the saints. We didn't talk much while eating, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by men who've said all that needs saying and now simply enjoy being in the same room. After the plates were cleared, he asked if we could take one last ride together before he hit the road. We drove out to the edge of town, where the hills begin to roll into each other like sleeping giants. There's a spot up there, a flat patch just high enough to see the whole valley. It was where I proposed to Rosa, and where we later took Daniel to fly his first kite. The wind was stronger up there that morning, and the sun was still low, throwing long shadows behind the truck. Daniel parked, and we both got out, leaning on the hood, taking it all in. Do you think she'd be proud of us? He asked. I didn't need to ask who she was. I nodded, eyes on the horizon. She always believed in second chances, in people finding their way, even if it takes a lifetime. He stood quietly, staring at the land as if trying to memorize it. I think I'm ready to come home, he said. My throat tightened. I didn't smile, didn't cry. I just put my hand on his shoulder and gave it a squeeze. That was enough. Back at the house, he packed his things slowly. Like each shirt folded was a question he'd finally answered. Before he zipped his bag, he turned to me and said, I don't want to forget again. Help me remember, Papa. I nodded and handed him the notebook, now filled with my scribbles and his. Start here, I said. As he loaded his things into the trunk of his sleek city car, he paused beside the truck. Can I take her? He asked. I raised an eyebrow. What for? He grinned. Just for a little drive. I want to feel what you felt. I tossed him the keys. Treat her gently. She's carried more than just wood and tools. He nodded. I know. She carried a family. He drove off slowly, and I watched from the porch, arms crossed, the morning sun warming my face. A few neighbors looked on too, probably wondering why Daniel wasn't in his new car. I didn't explain. Some things don't need to be explained, only lived. 10 minutes later, he returned, parked the truck perfectly, and got out smiling like a man who had just reconnected with his own blood. Before he left, we stood in the doorway. He hugged me tight, the kind of hug a son gives not out of habit, but from something deeper. I'll be back next month, he promised. Maybe sooner. I watched his car disappear down the road, the dust rising behind it like a memory. Still settling into place, I turned to the truck, gave her a soft pat on the hood and whispered, You did good, old girl. That night, I sat on the bench outside, under the stars. The cicadas were humming, and the town was quiet. I thought about all the years that passed between us, me and Daniel, like pages left unread. But now, we'd started a new chapter, a better one. I wasn't just the man with the old truck anymore. I was the father who had been seen, forgiven, and loved back. The following week, I returned to my routines, the plaza in the mornings, the workshop in the afternoons, the same coffee, the same conversations. But something was different now. The others noticed it before I did. You walk taller, Tomas said one morning, slapping my back. "What happened? Did someone fix your spine?" I laughed. "No, amigo. Just fixed something inside me that was heavier than my back ever was." I began writing more regularly, not just in the notebook I'd shared with Daniel, but in others too. I started chronicling things I thought were lost. Memories of Rosa's laughter echoing in the hallway, the smell of fresh varnish when I finished a cabinet, the way Daniel used to trace the edges of his wooden toys as if they were alive. I wrote because I didn't want to forget again, and I wrote for him, so that when he returned, he'd never have to search for his roots. They'd be waiting, etched in ink. One day, while organizing a box of old tools, I found a small wooden carving, tucked under a rag, a tiny house, about the size of my palm. Daniel had made it when he was maybe 7 or 8. I used to carry it in my shirt pocket when I worked far from home like a talisman. I had forgotten all about it. Now, holding it again, I smiled and placed it on the windowsill facing the street. A reminder that the smallest hands once built the strongest foundations. That Sunday, at Mass, the priest spoke about forgiveness, not as something granted, but as something reclaimed. To forgive, he said, is not to forget. It is to remember with peace. I felt those words sink into my chest like seeds in fertile soil. I glanced around the pews, wondering how many others had swallowed pride and found healing in silence, just as I had. Later that day, I saw Daniel's name light up on my old cell phone. He asked about the domino games, about Emilio's knees, about the jacaranda tree. But what struck me most was that he didn't talk like someone passing time. He talked like someone investing it. "I signed the papers," he told me. "I'm taking a year off. I want to come back, spend time here, maybe even open a small design studio near the plaza. Something simple. Something real." I didn't say much, just listened. My heart beat steady, not fast, not anxious, just steady, like an old engine humming reliably after years of neglect. When we hung up, I stepped outside and looked at the sky. The light was softer than usual, the kind that bathes everything in gold before it disappears. I realized then you don't always get second chances in the form you expect. Sometimes they arrive looking just like the life you had, only clearer. That night I pulled out a blank page and began writing a new letter. Not to Daniel this time, to myself. I wrote about how easy it is for men to get lost, not in cities or work, but in their own silence. How we confuse endurance with strength and pride with dignity. How sometimes healing isn't about saying the right thing, but simply staying long enough to be understood. And when I finished, I placed the letter under the seat of the truck. Maybe Daniel would find it someday. Maybe not. But I liked the idea of it being there, waiting, quietly, like everything else that mattered. The next few weeks passed with a quiet rhythm that felt almost sacred. The days were warm, the rains gentle, and every morning I found myself waking before the roosters, sitting at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee, notebook open. I wrote about everything. The songs Rosa used to hum while folding laundry, the way Daniel once hid under the bed during thunderstorms, the sound of my father's whistle coming up the road after work. I wasn't just remembering, I was preserving. Daniel called often, and not just to check in. He sent pictures, a desk he was designing using reclaimed wood, sketches of the shop he planned to open in town, ideas for restoring the old warehouse near the train tracks. "It's not about architecture anymore," he said one night. "It's about building something that feels like home, not just for me, but for others too." I could hear Rosa in that. She always said the best things we build are the ones others can live in. One Saturday afternoon, he showed up earlier than expected. No suitcase, no fanfare, just him, in jeans and a faded shirt, with a small toolbox in hand. "Thought I'd help fix that hinge on the workshop door," he said. We didn't speak much as we worked, but when we finished, he sat on the ground and leaned against the wall. "You were right," he said. "Sometimes answers do come slow, but they stick better that way." That evening we cooked together. He chopped onions like he was back in the city kitchen, and I teased him for crying. "They don't make architects like they used to," I said. He smirked. "No, they just make sons trying to get it right." We ate under the stars, using the tailgate as a table, the same way Rosa and I used to on late summer nights. It felt full, not of food, but of presence. The truck parked beside us seemed to watch over the moment like a quiet guardian. Daniel looked at her and said, "I think she forgave me too." I nodded. She always knew the truth, just waited for you to catch up. He walked over and opened the door, resting his hand on the seat. I wondered then if he'd found the letter I left. He didn't say, and I didn't ask. The next morning, the town felt smaller, not in size, but in the way everything felt closer. Daniel and I walked to the plaza together. The neighbors nodded with soft smiles, like they too sensed something had shifted. Emilio met us on the way and handed Daniel a small package. "A new wrench set," he said. "You're going to need it if you're staying for good." Daniel grinned. "I plan to use every one of them." We spent the afternoon in the workshop, going through old blueprints and new sketches. Daniel showed me a design for the community center he wanted to build, modest, open air, with space. For teaching crafts, hosting town events, and even a small library. "I want it to feel like this place," he said, gesturing to my shop. "Not polished, just honest." And as we sat there, father and son, surrounded by wood shavings and possibility, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from creation, from building something new on top of something old, without erasing the cracks, letting them show even. Because the cracks are where the story seeps in. The days began to flow like water through familiar channels. Daniel started waking earlier, sweeping the shop before I could even tie my boots. He organized my cluttered tool wall, not to change it, but to understand it. "Every notch on these handles tells me something," he said once, running his fingers over the grooves. "It's like a diary, but with wood." I nodded, proud, because for the first time I could see he wasn't just learning how I lived, he was honoring it. One afternoon, we drove the truck out past the hills to visit the gravesite. Rosa's name still shone softly on the stone, the flowers slightly wilted, but lovingly placed. Daniel stood beside me, his hands in his pockets, quiet. After a while, he said, "I think she knew I'd come back. I just took the long road." I put a hand on his shoulder. She always believed in both of us, even when we didn't. Back in town, people began stopping Daniel in the street, not to ask when he was leaving, but what he was planning next. He started drawing ideas for benches in the plaza, new lighting for the church, even a little mural for the school. "It's not just about designing," he told me. "It's about belonging." I couldn't have put it better myself. The truck, once a symbol of separation, now felt like a vessel of connection. Daniel drove it often. Sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors needing a lift. Each time he brought it back, he'd wipe the dust off the dashboard and whisper something to it. Like a prayer, I never asked what. Some conversations are better left between a man and the machine that carried his truth. One evening, after a long day of sanding doors and painting shutters, Daniel sat with me under the porch. The light from the workshop spilled onto the dirt path, and crickets sang in the brush. He turned to me and asked, "Do you ever regret not telling me more when I was younger?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe, but I also believe some things can't be taught, only discovered when the time is right." He nodded, as if he already knew. That night I found him asleep in the hammock, notebook open on his chest, pencil still in hand. I didn't wake him, just covered him with a blanket and turned off the light. The man who had once forgotten who he was now dreaming in the same place he had first learned to see the stars. And I knew then, with a quiet certainty, that he had returned, not just to the town, but to himself. The next morning, we painted a sign together, Taller Aguilar, Carpinteria y Diseño Familiar. We hung it on the front wall of the shop, crooked but honest. People stopped by to read it, some clapped, Others took pictures. Daniel stepped back to admire it and said, "It's not perfect." I smiled. "Neither are we, that's what makes it ours." Later that day, he asked me if he could take the truck into the city one last time to gather a few tools, close out his apartment, say goodbye to that life properly. She deserves one more. "Adventure," he said. I handed him the keys without hesitation. "Drive safe and take the long road." The truck returned 3 days later, a bit dustier than before, but humming just as steady. Daniel stepped out wearing the same boots he used to wear as a boy, now scuffed and stained from work. He looked lighter, like he'd dropped a weight somewhere along that winding road. "She still runs like a dream," he said, patting the hood. "Even past a few fancy cars on the way back." I chuckled. "She was always faster than people gave her credit for." He unpacked a few boxes, mostly tools, sketch pads, a framed photo of Rosa he'd kept hidden in his city apartment. "I used to look at this when I felt lost," he admitted. "But now, I think I want her here again, watching over us." We placed the photo above the workbench, right next to the calendar she'd gifted me the year before she passed. It was like setting her chair back at the table. In the weeks that followed, the shop filled with noise. Again, the good kind. Hammers tapping, wood being planed, neighbors dropping by with projects or stories. Daniel taught a group of local teens how to build birdhouses. He even brought them coffee and pan dulce every Saturday. "They remind me of me," he said one morning. "Only no one's told them they're allowed to be more yet." One day, I caught him sitting in the truck alone, engine off, eyes closed. I watched from the porch. After a while, he stepped out and said, "She's not just a truck anymore. She's where I learned who I was and who I want to be." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We were beyond words now. What needed to be healed had been, and what remained was simply love, raw, quiet, and enduring. On the first anniversary of his return, we hosted a small gathering at the shop. Families came with food, laughter filled the air, and the domino table stayed full until well after dark. Daniel gave a short speech, just a few words. "This place saved me," he said, "and I didn't even know I needed saving." The applause was warm, but what moved me most was seeing the pride in his eyes, no longer hidden behind success or shame. That night, after everyone left, we sat on the truck's tailgate once more. He looked up at the stars and asked, "Do you think one day I'll be the kind of man you are?" I put my hand on his back, firm and steady. "You already are. You just needed to take the long road home to remember it." Before bed, I slipped one final note into the glove. "Compartment, just a few lines. If you ever forget again, just take her for a drive. She remembers for both of us." I didn't tell him. Maybe he'll find it in a year, maybe in 10, but it will be there, like the roots beneath an old tree, unseen, but holding everything upright. And now every time I hear that engine start in the morning, I smile. Not because it runs, but because it carries my son forward. Not to escape the past, but to carry it proudly, as a man who finally remembered where he came from. Sometimes it takes a lifetime, or just one old truck, to bring someone back to who they really are. I never imagined silence could hold so much love, or that the things we forget might be the very things that saved us. Watching my son remember little by little felt like spring returning after a long winter. Quiet, steady, full of life. If you've ever felt unseen by someone you love, or if you've taken the long road back to something you didn't know you'd lost, maybe you understand what this story really means. Maybe you've carried a weight that was never yours, or maybe, like Daniel, you once walked away from a part of yourself, and now you're trying to come home. Tell me in the comments if this story touched you somehow. Sometimes sharing what we've lived is the quietest way to heal what still hurts. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone distant, someone silent, share it with them. It might be the beginning of something important. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, Stories about bonds that survive time, pain, and silence. Stay close. There's still so much life left to tell.